There's no doubt about it, I am a stationery freak. There's something really compelling about a good notebook. There's so much potential in that. Sometimes searching for the perfect pencil case, stationery carrier, stationery organizer can be a meaningful journey of weeks, months, sometimes even years. So if anything that I've just mentioned resonates with you, the chances are that you too are a stationery freak. And in today's episode, I'm going to share 10 pieces of stationery that I use and why I use them. I'm so much of a stationery freak actually that I co-host a podcast with a friend of mine called Helen called Stationery Freaks. Now I'm sure if you asked Helen what her 10 items would be, they would be stickers, Hobonichi planners, but today I'm going to share the 10 that I use. Notebooks are basically the very foundations of my life as a stationery freak. So I'm going to introduce some notebooks here. This is category 1, the first thing in my stationery freaks top 10 list. And I've cheated a little bit here because I've included multiple notebooks under the category of notebooks. First up, my workhorse of my notebook collection, and this is an A4 yellow legal pad. I'm a big fan of these, and I use what is essentially a Cornell note-taking method, which means that you carve off a portion of the page for little notes, actions, insights, thoughts, ideas, but the main body of whatever it is you're doing is contained in the main part of the page. I like the size, it's got lots of real estate, there's something really nice about the colour. I tend to use these for first drafts of things, so this actual video was here as a first draft that I go through. If I'm doing a presentation, for example, then I will also write out the entire presentation in script form in a yellow legal pad. And that leads me on nicely to just do a little bit of a plug for my new book called Zero To Keynote. It's a book for the conference speaker, and I walk you through the whole process of coming up with ideas, submitting to a conference, building out the talk, rehearsing it, dealing with difficult questions, the delivery of it, of course, weaving in those principles of communication. It's a new self-published book. All of the artwork is mine, all of the design is mine, and all of the words are mine. You can grab a copy of this on cultivatedmanagement.com. It's strictly limited at the moment to 100 copies, and they are selling actually quite well, so I'm quite pleased with this one. So next up is this lovely little red notebook from TK Maxx. This is something that my middle kid bought me last year for Christmas. Now I've stupidly called it something like 2024 Ideas plus Dream to Reality book. Stupid name, but this is essentially that potential that I talk about with notebooks. Blank pages where the potential for me to express myself, come up with that next big business idea, write down some goals. This really is what that book's for. It's my kind of ideas and dreams, and then hopefully bringing those to life. I like this book because it can be carried around quite easily with me. The pages are really nice. I'm not going to show you the content because that's a bit of a private thing. Bit of a theme with some of these notebooks. Nice little bit of real estate. It's a little bit on the small side, but it is wonderfully thick. There's lots of pages in here. And this really is, it's a gift from my middle kid to me. So, it's quite an important, special notebook for me. Next up, this was a cheap purchase on Amazon. I'm not going to show you some of the content in here because this is my journal, but I will open it up and show you what's inside. It's a non-dated book, so I'm not an everyday journaler, so sometimes I might be 2 to 3 days, sometimes even a week between days when I do journal. As such, in a regular diary, you'll end up with all those blank spaces, whereas here I can just write the date, journal to my heart's content, put a little circle dot thing up here as to what day of the week it actually is, and it's super thick. It holds ink pen particularly well, and it's just a really nice notebook. It was advertised as being leather, but it's not. It's some sort of fake leather. By the way, all the products that I mention here, I will list them all down below with relevant suitable links if I can find them still. That's my journal. Next up, this is a new habit for me. It's an interesting experiment and I'm actually really thoroughly enjoying it. This is a Collins ledger, you know, a sort of financial ledger. Let's have a quick look. Again, I'm not going to show you some of the stuff in here because it's quite a sort of private thing, I guess. But we've got a usual ledger, you know, for money coming in, money going out, and then opportunities subtotal at the bottom. Now I do capture money coming in from books, videos, work, etc., etc., and money going out to make sure that I'm not spending too much, which is a habit of mine. But I also use it to capture daily things that are worth noting, worth registering. It's important to point out this isn't a future-orientated book. This isn't about goals and dreams and hopes and wishes. This is about things that have happened. So notable things like today, I've just got back from my youngest kid's assembly at school. Always a joyful thing to watch. Amateur, yes. Can't hear what half the kids are saying, but it's funny and it's good and it's inspiring and it's joyful. So that will go in the ledger. It's a kind of ledger audit for my life. Wonderful little habit. I might even do a video on the benefits of this once I've sort of realized them, because I've only really been doing this for about a week. But this is a lovely book, lovely little ledger book from Collins. Very good. And then last but not least in this notepad selection is this book. This is an Ottergami notebook. This is my second one of these. Really, really beautiful book. It's a lovely, lovely little notebook. Nice and thick. Got some really nice thick pages. I've gone for the dotted version here rather than the lined or the plain. And I use this for my sketching. So let's have a quick look through. Not very good. So this is from a Domestika course that I've been sitting about architectural design using marker pens. And it always looks much better on Domestika than it does in my notebook, let's put it that way. But as you can see, this is just some sketches, some doodles, some artwork, some drawings, rabbit pigman there. You know, some lettering as well. So I've been practicing lettering, another good course on Domestika. It's good, it's a really nice notebook. What I will say is it doesn't take really, really thick ink pens particularly well. So let me show you the first page. With all notebooks, there's this potential, this rich thing that could happen in this notebook. It could be, you know, the next masterpiece, the breakthrough idea. It could be the journal that changes my life. That's what I like about the potential. And that's why we started the Stationery Freaks podcast. That potential that analog stationery can give us is rich. But the problem is, the problem that I have is that I usually always ruin the first page. And this was no different. I did this nice little sort of circular mixture of different sized circles and then proceeded to colour them in with some pens that are here, but I'll show you in a minute. And they went all the way through. And they covered the back, they covered the next page, they bled through to the page afterwards, and they bled through to that page. And a little bit of bleeding through to this page as well. So they don't handle really, really thick, really fluid ink pens particularly well. Other than that, no problem whatsoever. A great little notebook. Where's he going? Next up in my essential stationery collection is these little pen holders. So a lot of these notebooks don't actually come with a pen holder attached, which is, you know, usually okay. But actually I really like to have a dedicated pen for a notebook, and it's, you know, a little bit frustrating to grab your notebook and then have to scramble around for a pen. So I bought some of these sticky little pen things that you can stick into your notebook at the front to give you a nice little pen holder on your notebook. Very effective. Got a few left here. Super cheap. These were on Amazon. I think I paid about £4, something like that for these. Very good. Now, I probably use pencils, and this is the next one on my list, for about 97% of all of the work that I do using stationery and analog. I like to write my notes in pencil so I can rub them out, scribble them out. It's, you know, it's not messy particularly. I journal usually with a pencil, sometimes with an ink pen. We'll come to those in a minute. But the pencil that I use the most is probably this mechanical pencil. It's a Rotring Tiki 07. Not particularly expensive. You can refill it with pencil lead through the top here. It's a clickable mechanical pencil. It's joyful. It's really joyful to use. It's a lovely grip on it. It's about the right weight and thickness for me. But I also use these Staedtler Norris school pencils. Super cheap, buy them in packs of like 100, and these are my sort of everyday scribbling pencils. Usually when I'm writing drafts of books or podcasts or these videos, I'll use these pencils. Very, very, very nice pencils. Maybe not quite on the dark enough side. You can get them in a sort of darker lead, but these are fine for me. Now we move on to ink pens. Now, if you were to ask Helen what was on her top 10 as a fellow stationery freak and co-host of the podcast with me, ink pens, fountain pens would be somewhere close to the top of the list, I would imagine. She's got, I reckon, probably 3 million of these things, and she loves them. I do too, but I only have two. I have this Waterman pen, which is lovely. Refillable through the ink pot by, sucking and squeezing the ink out of that into it. Can be messy. First time I used it, I spilt it all over. Lovely pen. But day to day, I use this cheap Parker one. I think it was about £8. Use a cartridge. It's actually just run out just this morning while I was using it. But essentially, they're the two ink pens that I use for about that other 3% of my writing. So for example, if you were to buy a copy of the Zero To Keynote book, then I would handwrite you a little note to go in the front, and that would be done typically using an ink pen. Now, given that pencils feature so heavily in my stationery list, it makes sense to be able to sharpen them, and that's where this Rapsico windy handled pencil sharpener comes in. This is over the top for my needs. It's clearly not very portable, but it's just something so satisfying about using this pencil sharpener. Now, it's not the most intuitive thing to use. You sort of push this button in here on the side. Don't know whether you can see that. Let's show that to the camera up there. And that opens the little trap door, and you put your pencil in, you give it a bit of force, and you kind of have to push the pencil as you are turning. And it does take quite a few turns to sharpen the pencil. But then when it comes out, it's got a nice clean point on it. Makes a nice clean job of the rest of the pencil around the top here where it shaves it. It's just quite joyful to use, actually. Reminds me of those old pencil sharpeners that we used to have at school when I was at school in the 80s, that were attached to the teacher's desk. So if you wanted to sharpen your pencil, you had to go to the front and use one of those windy pencil sharpeners. Pretty expensive for what it is. It's nice though. So we move on to the unsung heroes, the thing that we take for granted, the thing that we use pretty much every year when we're doing wrapping for birthday presents or Christmas, sellotape. I use sellotape a lot. In my studio at the back, I've got some fairy lights. They're attached to the writing bureau using sellotape. I use sellotape to seal up the wrapping around the book. And I always use sellotape in two sizes. One, this handy little reel, which I don't use very often, but these big ones as well. These bigger ones are always on a dispenser. I hate using tape where you've got to try and find the end and it just gets messy, and not a fan of that. But this dispenser I think was about £4, and it does the job nicely. Next up, we've got colouring pens. I've got two particular types here. I've got these sort of felt tip, inky sort of pens. They were pretty cheap. Twin markers, so you've got two ends. You've got more of a marker pen on one end, and then you've got a nice little fine liner on the other. Loads of different colours. These are the pens that leak through the Ottergami notebook, so I tend to use these on thicker pieces of paper. A4, A3, proper drawing grade paper. They're pretty good, super cheap, nice little bag. And then I have these nice little wax crayons. These wax, I think they're sort of wax pencils. They're not like wax crayons that like little kids would use, but they are a sort of wax-based thing inside. My God, I've got to get better at describing these things, haven't I? They are extremely nice to use these. The feel of them is really nice. They're coated in a really nice material that just feels right. Loads of different colours. Use the pencil sharpener, of course, to sharpen them. I've got a bag full of them here. They really are very good for sort of shading and colouring and just adding a little bit of texture to my learning notes, for example. Really nice pencils. So with all of this stationery comes the need to organise, to group, and to carry this stationery around. And that is where these wonderful little canvas bags come in. I bought them on Amazon, and I think these are designed for builders, carpenters, etc. to put tools and what have you in, but I use them for stationery. So as you can see, I've written on the front in a Posca pen what's inside. We've got the colouring one, which we've just looked at. I've got one full of painting stuff, so I've got my watercolours and brushes and various different stuff in there. That's for my crafty side of me. I've got scrap note ones here, so this has got glue and scissors and cutting, you know, scalpels, that kind of stuff in here for doing scrap notes and, you know, basic like crafting stuff together and sticking it together. And then I have this last one, which is stationery. This has got all of my ink pens, gel pens, drawing pencils, various different things in here, as well as some highlighters, and we've got this nice little pigment liner type stuff. Loads of pens in there for doing that sketching and that artwork in the Ottergami book. So the Ottergami book tends to travel with this. Really durable, really good purchase actually, very pleased with these. And I could also, you know, I could attach them to my belt if I wanted to and carry all four around. That's a bit sad. And then finally, another unsung hero, but something that I use every day. Because I use the Cornell note-taking method, I'm always carving off a portion of my work notes, my writing notes, all sorts of stuff. I also use this for learning notes and for drawing and all sorts of other stuff. It's a ruler. Unsung, undervalued, super daily use for me. Always a metal one for me. I do have a plastic one, but I don't tend to use it. Particularly if I'm doing any cutting, you don't want the blade to sort of run across the top of the ruler and slice your finger off. And like I say, I'm always using it to carve off a portion of the page for my Cornell note taking. I often use it to do measurements and various different things, or just to draw lines for diagrams, etc. that I'm working on as part of my work. So there you have it. There's my 10 essential Stationery Freaks items of stationery. And if you are interested in stationery and analog and the potential that this brings to our lives, then I think you'll enjoy the Stationery Freaks podcast, which you can find at stationeryfreaks.com. You'll find all sorts of interviews with stationery makers, stationery sellers, people that use stationery, including, you know, Sunday Times top 10 bestsellers and various different people, as well as Helen and I waffling on about the potential, the value, the love of stationery. And of course, if you would like to purchase a copy of Zero To Keynote, if you're interested in conference speaking or even public speaking in general, maybe at work, something like that, then everything I know from the last 20 years of doing this at international keynote level is in this book. And you can find this at cultivatedmanagement.com. With that, I'm going to tidy away all of this stationery back to where it belongs, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Bye.